Hello, I'm Joshua Unruh, your superhero scholar. Welcome to the Superhero University on Captain Marvel, Earth's Mightiest Hero. Have a seat. Class is now in session. Well, friends, another week gone in the countdown to Captain Marvel finally punching holes in the movie screen. The review embargo has been lifted this week, and while I usually avoid reviews until after I've seen a film, I admit that I nibbled around the edges of things for Captain Marvel. I've got to say, I was hyped before, but I am even more hyped now. I am reading a lot of conversation about how inspiring this film is, and how Carol is meeting and possibly surpassing DC's Wonder Woman as the premier female superhero in theaters. Also, it's not hurting things that it's apparently, and I quote, pretty damn 90s. I think this bodes well for the Marvel Cinematic Universe's newly minted Mightiest Hero. So, without further delay, let's dive into the next 2 issues of Earth's Mightiest Hero. That's right, I said 2 issues. My first foray into Captain Marvel was just for the first issue and still managed to be a comfortable length. But the second issue proved a bit thinner and resulted in an episode of Superhero University that was much shorter than I prefer them. In fact, that is an insight into one of my criticisms of this story going forward. At any rate, I'm going to look at 2 full issues this time around, not only because it will result in a more satisfying SHU, but also because these 2 issues finish one part of the story and move us into another act. So starting in issue 3, pages 1 and 2, we can see that Carol is still thinking tactically. She's staying above the fray. She doesn't want to be overwhelmed by unexpected prowess or abilities. But we are equally unsurprised that she's read the situation a little wrong. Remember, she is very much out of her depth. Still, I appreciate the mystified and odd reactions to Captain Marvel from Banshee Squadron. Wide-eyed shock is the only correct reaction to the spectacle going on before them. As we turn to page 3, we see that even after the big reaction to Carol, these women are still badass professionals, and they recover quickly. But in every squad, there's always a Mackie. It's just usually Carol that fills that role. So, irony abounds, Turning to page 4 and 5, we see that Carol doesn't underestimate the Banshees just because they're not super people or Avengers. She trusts them to do their jobs. Also, much like the Absorbing Man in the first issue, she outthinks the bigger, badder foe. Remember, fight smarter, not harder. Turning to page 6, let me say, I appreciate all the beauty shots and power poses of Captain Marvel. But the fact is, there is literally nothing going on this page. And suddenly, I find myself oversensitive to how many pages have just been Carol looking badass while flying, or pinups of Captain Marvel, or Carol posing in front of airplanes. It's part of what led to such a short SHU last week, and it's become a major complaint as I reread the series. It's not a problem that persists forever in Earth's Mightiest Hero, but it's very prevalent in this first arc. And it's disappointing to have so many pages devoted to not much happening. Turning to page 7, we have another opportunity to see Carol's overall competency, and I really appreciate it. It hesitated. There's a pilot in there, she tells the Banshees. It feels like something only a pilot would know. And when they pull the pilot out, he's Japanese, not Kree. That's good to know. Although, it sort of also deepens the mystery. Daisy is then angry enough to attack a helpless prisoner. And to me, this is one of 2 things. It's either a clue to that possible deeper relationship with Rivka that I alluded to in the previous issue, or it's Daisy overreacting because she's a civilian. I don't really buy into the second option. I mean, I would chalk it up to the Banshees just being civilians, except that they are otherwise so competent and such excellent soldiers. So for me, I think this is more of that subtextual romantic relationship between Daisy and Rivka. I'm still open to being told that I'm reading too much into it though, so speak up. Turning to page 8, it is an entire page of dialogue. And so soon after realizing how many wasted pages we've had, I'm tempted to complain about this scene. But the more I reflect on it, the more I'm convinced that it's totally worth it. It could have been done in less space, or it could have been done with a more dynamic page layout, but the threat is so cocksure, it's so thorough, and such a glimpse into both the mindset of Carol and her expectations for the Banshees. I love it. I've just decided I love it. On page 9, we confirm that the Prowlers are Kree tech, and Carol has a second to wonder what's going on with both time travel and Kree detritus in 1943. I love the first idea the Banshees jump to is that Carol is an alien. Not only because it's pretty close to spot on and shows that they have some insight, but none of the known superpeople in World War II were as powerful or flashy as Carol is. Even if they read every single newspaper report about the Invaders or Spitfire or even Union Jack, the Banshees are not going to equate Carol with them. They're going to think she's something else entirely. And for those of you who don't know, let me speak about this a little bit. There were a few costumed adventurers and super people active in Marvel's World War II. The most famous are, of course, the Invaders, Captain America and Bucky, Namor, Prince of Atlantis, and the Human Torch, along with his sidekick, Toro. You also had a few British folks like Spitfire, who was a speedster, and Union Jack, who you really wouldn't have read much about in the newspaper. He was mostly in the shadows murdering Nazi vampires. And for the record, Union Jack has the single best flag-themed costume that has ever appeared on a comic book page. That's just facts. And so none of these people really get anywhere near the flash and power that Carol has. I mean, the Human Torch might get kind of close since he envelops himself in flame from head to toe, but everyone knows he's an android, even though they call him the Human Torch. Let's just say that that name was put to better use about 20 years later when it was given to the member of the Fantastic Four who also envelops himself in flame from head to toe, Johnny Storm. A much less confusing use there, since Johnny is actually human and not an android. Moving on with this story, on page 10, I appreciate how real Carol is with these women. She's been saved by them, she's saved them in return, she's fought beside them, she's now worked beside them, really, she's soldiered beside them. Of course she feels comfortable here, and of course she feels like these are people she can get real with. This is also a moment when we get another recap of Carol's origin. That's kind of a lot of them in the first 3 issues, but this time we emphasize the wishing machine nature of the psychomagnetron. Now, it will be a few issues before that comes home to roost, but that will eventually be a very important bit of reworking details. Moving into pages 11 and 12, Carol asks, "Does that make me less frightening?" And I like that Bijou's answer is, hell no. But I also like that Daisy recovers and is genuinely enthralled by Carol's story. We introduce cartoons, or comic books, and I think that's just delightfully meta. It sets up a fantastic interlude later. We'll get to it. It's at the end of this issue. This is also where Captain Marvel says, "That boy didn't kill Rivka, Daisy. The war did. That one kid is not your enemy." I don't love it when superheroes go to war. Superheroes shouldn't kill people. But the job of a soldier is to kill the enemy. I don't like it when those lines get blurred at all. And I feel like this is a really excellent superhero perspective on that whole situation. It's one that I can imagine coming straight from Captain America and being passed on to Carol, or better yet, one that Carol gave to him while he was dealing with some of what he had to do in World War II. Daisy asks, then who is our enemy? And it's a reasonable question both morally and philosophically, but DeConnick uses it to refocus us, the reader, on the mystery at play in the story. Because Carol's answer is, dunno yet, but maybe Kree, and maybe none of this is real. But the suggestion that this is all fake or some kind of construct just upsets Bijou Kawasaki, and I can feel her anger, I can feel her offense. And those words and feelings also ground Carol. Whatever is going on in the larger picture, the fight is still coming. And Carol knows that's just the prelude to the fight to return home. And there's probably going to be a fight in between dealing with the Kree and the mystery of time-traveling technology. Whatever the big picture is, Carol must be present here and now. Page 13 is the obligatory Suit Up series of panels. Now look, these are always a little bit fun. There's a reason that Suit Up became a recurring bit in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But I again wonder about the wasted page count in this story, especially considering that a big battle is coming. And to continue with that criticism, I don't love the way that page 14 is laid out. It actually covers a decent amount of action, but the ground troops bisecting the 2 air battles seems needlessly confusing to the eye. Otherwise, props to page 14 for having extremely dynamic action shots in an issue that is otherwise a little short on them. Page 15, Carol gets cocky, but she has the power to see herself through. Both of these moments feel very Carol Danvers to me. As we move into page 16, the 2-to-1 odds the Banshees fought through so easily become one mega prowler, and Captain Marvel sees that as more of a threat, as a true escalation. I admit I don't entirely buy it. It doesn't really strike me as true escalation. I'm just not sold on it as a bigger danger. But it does make a good cliffhanger for the end of this issue. And even though we're on page 16 of 19, this is the end of this issue as far as Captain Marvel is concerned. When we turn to page 17, we are given an interlude to NASA in 1961. And if I'm honest, it's pretty nonsensical. I mean, outside of the fact that Helen Cobb is there, there's a connection, but it feels pretty tenuous. We've been in the present, we've been in 1943, and both make sense because Captain Marvel is there. She's the thing that ties those two disparate threads together. But she's not here at NASA in 1961. Her mentor is, years before Carol would meet Helen, but it doesn't feel like it's enough to justify this prelude to the next part of the story. In fact, if I didn't know what was going to happen in the next issue, I wouldn't realize that this was a prelude to the next part of the story. And so it feels like it's on somewhat shaky narrative ground for me. However, it does do the job of illustrating the fundamental problem that the real-life Mercury 13 had. They didn't have jet experience, and there was no way for women to get it, and that was a requirement for astronauts. I suppose, since I've given away that this is a prelude into the next issue, it's also useful to let us know that Helen was always this way. She was this way in 1961, she was this way when a young Carol Danvers met her, and she was this way right up until the day she died. We turn to page 18, and here we finally tie Helen and her plane to Peru geographically, and nearish to where Carol is in the 40s chronologically. After all, Helen is closer to 1943 than 2019 in 1961. So, like I say, this interlude, it doesn't do much for me. It feels like really shaky narrative ground, but with the introduction of Carol's little piece of alien technology, we can at least see the edges of the puzzle, if not the entire picture. Turning to page 19, though, this interlude I love. It's Captain Marvelous, a fake comic book done in a Golden Age style. And if you look closely, it turns out to be written by Daisy and drawn by Bijou. And I think that is just a fantastic touch. Not only does it let us know something about these women's lives after the war, but it shows that they went on to be where few other women were allowed to go, even outside of wartime. They never stopped being themselves, even after they left the Banshee Squadron. Also, in a similar way, it lets us look forward to the next issue where we aren't really sure what happens to Banshee Squadron, but thanks to this letting us know that Daisy and Bijou made it out, we can at least assume that Captain Marvel's able to set their lives to right also. Now, looking at the actual subject matter of Captain Marvelous, let's take note of the name. She is a woman named Captain Marvelous. And from jump, the male version is named in an almost dismissive way, Mr. Marvelous. And if you look at this little bit of story that we get, it's pretty clear that he is not the star of the strip. Daisy and Bijou learned something from Carol, and they never lost sight of this adventure with Captain Marvel on an island near Peru. And that brings us to the close of issue 3, moving into issue 4, page 1. I find that collections of monthly comics can sometimes frustrate even the veteran comic book reader. One of the ways that that's the case is a recap page. When you have to wait a month between issues, a quick explanation of the situation from 4 weeks ago is often necessary, but in the collection, it feels like a wasted page. And normally, I'd get over it. It wouldn't bother me. I would understand that this was a collection of something that came out monthly, and I would accept this recap page as a cost of doing business. But this isn't a story that already has way too many beauty shots and way too many power poses already. And so, here I am, frustrated nonetheless. That said, as recap pages go, this is a doozy. Giant alien eyeball, time travel, normal people freaking out, but an Avenger calls it Tuesday. It's good stuff, and the art is beautiful. Page 2 is also a very pretty page, and it escalates the threat well. Not only will Captain Marvel be unable to short out the Mega Prowler, which is how she beat the individual Prowlers in the previous issue, but it can actually redirect Carol's energy blasts back on her. It's possible that Carol will not be able to fight smarter, and instead will actually be forced to fight harder. On page 3, we see that Jerry is a professional. Women remain amazing, but Banshee Squadron is also right. Jerry is outmatched. Page 4, Captain Marvel picks herself up out of the dirt. She's back in the fight, but she's shaken badly. And immediately she begins her trademarked tactical thinking. And she realizes that Jerry is also thinking tactical thoughts. Captain Marvel realizes a kamikaze flight into the center of the eye is a good plan. It will work. Except for the fact that, like its namesake, the move will be fatal. The Banshees ask, "Think you can?" And Carol interrupts, "Nope. But when have I ever let that stop me?" Pure Carol. Love it. And then we cut to Jerry. Ladies, it's been an honor and a privilege. Jerry knows that she's flying to her death. It's not an accident. It's not happenstance. She knows that she's about to sacrifice herself for her squad, and she's prepared to do it. But on page 5, Captain Marvel saves Jerry and then prepares for herself to take on that kamikaze flight. Except it seems that she expects she will survive it, but that it will hurt a lot. And for the record, I've never poked myself in the eye with a mascara wand, but I've got a thing about my eyes, just a kind of minor phobia about stuff touching them or even really coming near them, so just hearing those words sounds pretty frightening as well as painful. Page 6 is another power pose and some excellent purple prose explaining what Carol is doing. Kinda. I mean, I don't hate it, but just a couple of pages ago, I thought, oh, we're going to have to see her power through physically. We are going to have to see Captain Marvel be the powerhouse, the physical powerhouse that we know she can be. And that's something we haven't really seen much of in this arc. And so for me, besting these machines with the use of her energy manipulation powers is a little disappointing. I kind of wanted to see her just wreck it with their two fists. Carol is also extra hard on herself, which is a personality trait we haven't seen much of up till now, but will get a lot of screen time in the next few issues. As we turn to page 7 and Captain Marvel regroups with Jerry and the Banshees, I'm not entirely clear on how Jerry flying her ship into the giant eye was supposed to pull off the same energy field maneuver that Captain Marvel did. It's frustrating that I don't understand why things are happening or how they were supposed to happen. And let me be clear right now. It isn't that I'm failing to enjoy this issue. It isn't that I'm failing to enjoy this arc. I just feel like I'd have a better handle on what's happening and why it was happening if we hadn't spent so much time in all of these issues posing. It's not bad, but I just want it to be better. And I kind of expect it to be better, whether that's fair or not. I do appreciate the moment that Jerry orders them to go gather up the prisoners and then tells Daisy to do better this time. And Daisy's response of, "Yes, sir, gonna do better this time, sir." Whatever else I can say about beauty shots and poses and about the plot not making as much sense as I'd like it to, I totally have a feel for the character of the women that are on this page. I know who they are. I get their interactions, and I understand more deeply who they are as a character, even with brief touches on their relationships and their interiority. Page 8. The shock and awe surrender is very good. I like it a lot. I just don't have a whole lot more to say about it. For me, it pays off on the big page-long threat that Carol gave last issue, and that justifies it enough for me. Page 9, and it's time to get to the bottom of this mystery. So with some more translation help from G.J. Corbin and Tomoki, Bijou says, "It's impossible for 6 fighter jets to go missing. What did you do with them?" The officer responds, "Girl, we didn't do anything with your rude word fighter jets. They never existed." For the record, it's not Japanese for rude word. It's apparently something of a pejorative or a curse, and Misters Corbin and Tomoki did not translate it for me into English, which is probably for the best, because then I would know a Japanese curse word, and there's really no way that I don't get myself in trouble with that. Returning to the story, Jerry is losing her patience. Taking over this base was supposed to solve the mystery, and it's just not getting the job done. And when Carol tells her she might want to settle down a little bit, Jerry asks, "Do you have a better plan?" And Carol is honest. "No, I'm not much of a planner." It's amazing to me how consistent Carol's characterization is through these issues. She's not a fool. She's not an idiot. She does sometimes charge headlong into danger, but she usually has the power and the know-how to back it up. She's just very self-aware. She doesn't make plans, she gets into trouble, and figures it out as she goes. I truly believe that if Carol got into a position where she didn't have the strength to just power through, she would slow down and start thinking and planning, but it isn't her default situation. There are a couple of other character bits that I appreciate here. First of all, Pilot's navigating by the stars. It's just another example of the competency that Carol brings to this story. Also, in what is becoming a running theme, Carol and Jerry trade jokes that men have definitely told at their expense. And it reminds me of Carol and Tracy doing the same thing in the first 2 issues. And in a way, it kind of depresses me because it shows me that men making those jokes at women is a thing that was going on in 1943, will still be going on in 1961, and is still going on now in the year of our Lord 2019. Men who happen to be listening to this, do better. And if you're already doing better, tell men around you that aren't doing better that they should do better. Okay, lecture over. Moving on to page 10 and 11. We get a recap on the Banshees that I like because we spotlight real history using fictional women. We'll do that again in the next few issues with the Mercury 13. But we also are given an insight into the mystery. Jerry's experience was the same as Carol's, and that seems like a clue. On page 12, Jerry's shrapnel joke gives Carol an aha moment. And I'm just going to be honest with you, this is an example of one of my less favorite tropes. I get why it's used, but honestly at this point it's overused, and it just bothers me. At any rate, now we've got the idea. Something blew up big enough to throw pieces of itself across space and time, which at least explains what happened to Carol and the Banshee Squadron. Or that is, it explains the how, if not the why and the what exactly. On page 13, Carol's plane shows back up. It's been time displaced to after Carol's original arrival. And if I'm honest, it's the kind of unexplained timey-wimey stuff that I kind of loathe in time travel stories. Time travel's complicated. It's not a thing that every writer should just decide to do. It's kind of varsity level stuff to keep it from devolving into a hot mess. And while I don't think that this is an example of a hot mess, I'm also not convinced that it totally works or that it even entirely pays off what we've been up to in the last couple of issues. What do you all think? How do you feel about time travel as a device? How well does it all have to hang together? And does it feel at this moment like it's hanging together well enough for Earth's Mightiest Hero? I'm open to your comments, friends. Page 14 is a moment of interpersonal insight from Carol. She says the nicest things that she could possibly say to the Banshees. They're the finest soldiers she's ever worked with. They should just be who they already are. They've got this. Now, I check every single privilege box as a straight white man, and I don't want to speak for women, but I can imagine that DeConnick wanted Carol to be speaking to every woman reading this book in this moment. These are the words that people need to hear when society has led them to think less of themselves than they deserve. Be who you already are. You've got this. Print it out in a beautiful font and tape it to your mirror. Or cross-stitch it. Or have somebody else put it on a pillow. Bottom line is, those are words that we could all stand to hear more often. Put it someplace in your life that you'll be reminded constantly. Be who you already are. You've got this. On page 15, Carol takes off, and she rejoins her plane and whites out again. This time she's blaming Helen. And honestly, I feel like that's a logic leap. But there isn't much else to go on, and it turns out that Carol's right anyway, so okay, fine. Timey-wimey stuff, right? Page 16. Suddenly we're back at the Whiskey Tenor Flyers Club, but the car out front and the clothing within tells us that this isn't either the present or 1943. This is the thing that I probably should have realized earlier, but I'm now utterly convinced the woman that everyone calls Oklahoma is Jerry Cobb. If you think back to when we first talked about the Mercury 13, I mentioned that Jerry Cobb was a member of the real-life Mercury 13 and also a fellow Oklahoman alongside myself. And I think that Helen Cobb is supposed to be a fictional stand-in for Jerry, but that it wouldn't be right to leave the real Jerry Cobb out of this comic book story about the Mercury 13. And so I think giving her the nickname of Oklahoma lets her stand out enough and suggests to anybody who knows anything about the Mercury 13 that this is Jerry Cobb, but we are not confusing her with Helen Cobb. Speaking of Helen, she's back. And this is after our dubious narrative choice from last issue's interlude. Helen says, "The very fact of my being threatens Mr. Howard's manhood." I really feel like in this moment, she's covering up a bit of her own disappointment with bravado. I mean, there is a lot of bravado between these women pilots, especially on these couple of pages. But the fact is, Helen had to give Howard something alien. She had to pull an ace in the hole out that was different than and separate from her own superb talent. And that has to gall her. Page 17, we get some more of that good banter between the women, but it hides the bombshell that Helen is about to drop on them. I am getting a real feeling for who these women are collectively. They're cocky, but it's earned, and they're self-assured. They are dying for a shot at NASA because they know if they get it, they can measure up. And then on page 18, in one page full of glib bluster, Helen throws down a literal winning hand while telling her fellow lady flyers about her metaphorical winning hand. It's pure Helen, and we can see why Carol loved her, and maybe get a glimpse of how Helen's influence on Carol helped Carol become fully herself. I can imagine Helen telling Carol, "Be who you already are. You've got this." Turning to page 19 and 20, I'm going to be honest, this issue ends on a bit of a low point for me. I don't love page 19. It's just more of Helen being Helen. And look, it's interesting and it's clever, and the dialogue is very much in the voice that's been established for Helen. It's executed well. But I also have to say, so what that she didn't agree with her sexist father? That's exactly what we'd be expecting from her based on everything else we've seen. But the fact is, it's here to take up a page so that we can do a big final page reveal. Although to me, the fact that we kind of burn through a page here takes away from that big reveal. Helen is really kind of just going on. We're not being told anything new about the story or the plot. We're not being shown anything new about Helen. Helen throws a small clue towards the big reveal when she says union suit, but honestly, who here didn't already know that this is how it was going to go? And when we turn to page 20, it's the big reveal. Much to Carol's shock, she's bunking with her mentor decades before her younger self first met Helen. And again, to be brutally honest, this reveal was obvious. It didn't shock me. However, the part of these two pages that lands for me is Carol's nervousness. I can feel it in the page. I can feel that she is very discomfited. Partly for all the reasons that she was out of sorts when she landed in 1943, but even more so because now she is talking to a woman who looms large in her personal pantheon, probably larger than almost anybody. At least as much as we're given an insight into Carol's backstory, no woman is more vital to who Carol grew up to be than Helen Cobb. And now here she is, meeting Helen for the first time through time travel, decades before her actual first time. And that brings us to the close of issues 3 and 4. And here we are at the halfway point, more or less, of the first arc in Earth's Mightiest Hero. I do remain intrigued. I am still largely enjoying this story, but I'm also a little baffled. I don't dislike how much Helen, her plane, the Mercury 13, and a piece of machinery that's apparently Kree ties it all together, but it also feels a little bit convenient. One of the best pieces of writing advice I ever received is that your story can only handle one coincidence, the one that kicks off the story. And I suppose that technically all this serendipity still counts as that. But while I'm still enjoying the story well enough, it feels off to only see that coincidence in the middle of the story rather than at the beginning. At least, it does to me. What do you all think? Am I overthinking it? Is the story working better for you than it is for me? Or does it feel a little confusing, a little scattershot? Feel free to let me know your thoughts by emailing me at pulpdictionpress@gmail.com or tweet and DM me at Joshua Unruh. I love it whenever a listener gets back to me with a response to one of my questions that aren't really rhetorical, or when they ask me new questions because of it. It's some of my favorite parts of podcasting. But that brings us to the end of the third session of Superhero University on Captain Marvel, Earth's Mightiest Hero. If you have any questions or input, please find me easily enough on Twitter and use the hashtag SHUMarvel. And remember that Superhero University is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. And if you can't support us financially, make sure to leave a glowing review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Thank you again for joining me for this session of Superhero University, and we'll see you back here for the next part of Captain Marvel, Earth's Mightiest Hero. Until then, class is dismissed.